A very pleasant good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome once again to the series of Thomas Thistlewood. Now, just to keep you fresh, Thomas Thistlewood is a white slave owner. And back in the 1750s, when he came to Jamaica, he owns up to 28 slaves. He treated them so brutally. He treated them so badly that I want you to stick around for the wickedest treatment of all that he called the Derby dose. Thomas Thistlewood was the uncle of Arthur Thistlewood, a British radical activist and conspirator in the Cato Street conspiracy. Thistlewood never married, but had a son, Mulatto John, by his slave Fibber, who was originally a slave of Cope's. John was born on the 29th of April in 1760, and Cope manumitted him on the 3rd of May 1762. An elder son, Thomas, born to Jenny, died in childhood. Thistlewood eventually purchased Fibber from Cope and lived with her at Breadnut Island. He bought a number of books for Mulatto John to read, but John showed little interest in reading. A disappointment to his father, who later accused John of stealing money from him. In 1775, Thistlewood apprenticed Mulatto John to William Hornby as a carpenter. John was unhappy with his apprenticeship and looked forward to the time when he could serve in the militia and get away from Hornby. One day in 1779, when John refused to go to work, Thomas had him flogged pretty well to persuade him to change his mind. When war broke out with the American colonies, John joined the Brown Infantry, a regiment from mixed-race Jamaicans, to prepare for a French invasion that never came. In 1780, John took ill and had to be brought home by his mother. Thistlewood wrote that John is very weak indeed and not in his right senses. Doctors of European origin were called and prescribed doses of bark and rhubarb, and according to Thistlewood, also laid blisters inside each thigh. They gave him a blister which brought away a great quantity of putrid blood. But despite or because of the doctor's attention, John died of a fever on the 7th of September 1780, though Thistlewood and Fibber believed that John had been poisoned by a jealous slave. Thistlewood seems to have enjoyed his powerful position over black female slaves and showed very little interest in Mary Holmes when he finally met another woman who came from Lincolnshire. When slaves paired up, Thistlewood often disregarded such union and raped the female slave. When Little Member and a slave driver named Johnny became a couple, Thistlewood raped Little Member to celebrate the union. In 1764, Thistlewood's nephew, John Thistlewood, joined his uncle in Jamaica. But when John sexually abused Little Member on a regular basis, Johnny became angry, and in an attempt to maintain order, Thomas warned his nephew off and delivered a harsh physical punishment to the hapless member. Later that year, John Thistlewood was found drowned, possibly as a result of revenge by Johnny. A year later, Thistlewood's slave blew shell horns and fired guns to celebrate John Thistlewood's death. Now let's get on with life in Jamaica at that time, because life in Jamaica for slave owners was great. They could do whatever they wanted to do. Jamaica was by far the richest colony in the British Empire. Thistlewood was only of average wealth in white Jamaican society, especially in comparison to wealthy planters such as Simon Taylor. But at the time of his death, he was still far wealthier than most British men in other parts of the empire. He acquired more wealth in Jamaica than he could have done if he had chosen to remain in Lincolnshire. While Jamaicans who survived tropical disease were on average 50 times wealthier than residents of the British Isles, and certainly wealthier than their counterparts in North America. In 1750, a 29-year-old Thistlewood arrived in Jamaica with very few possessions, but was immediately sought after as a plantation overseer. And by 1757, his wage had risen to £100 a year. A year later, that was increased to £120 a year. This was an enormous sum compared to the average wage of white Europeans living in the Americas. Such wages allowed him to purchase slaves and hire them out. He could have continued to make more money working for others, but in the mid-1760s, he decided to become an independent landowner, not as a rich sugar producer, but as a modestly well-to-do market gardener and horticultural expert for Jamaican Western End. He acquired local respectability, often dining with his parish wealthiest planters, and served in several local offices, including Justice of the Peace. After one lavish meal in 1778, Thistlewood and his fellow planters played cricket. Whites were outnumbered 9-1 in Jamaica, and the imbalance affected everything on the island. During Thistlewood's first year in Jamaica, he lived in an almost exclusively black world, having no contact with other whites for weeks on end. Such disparity was even greater in rural Western Jamaica, where Thistlewood eventually settled, with the proportion of slaves to white being as high as 15-1. Planters such as Thistlewood thus lived in superficially black society, maintained by white control using fear, inequality, and brutality. With almost no social restraint, slave owners ruled their slave with a degree of violence that left outside observers aghast. Historian Trevor Bernard called Thistlewood a brutal sociopath, but suggests that Thistlewood's treatment of his slave was not unusual. Unlike other colonies where slavery was widespread, such as the Virginia colony, where slave owners often developed a paternalistic yet still cruel attitude toward their slaves, most Jamaican slave owners were convinced that only the severe application of brute force could keep the more numerous African slaves under control. In 1753, Thistlewood wrote about the trial of several slaves for the theft of goods from the Salt River estate, who belonged to his employer, Darrell. Alva's squaw hung, Fortune's squaw both ears cropped, both nostrils slit, and mark on both cheeks, cheddar, right ear cropped, right nostril slit, and mark on the left tree. When a Salt River slave named Robin ran away with two boys from Egypt, Darrell and Robin tried and executed, after which Thistlewood received Robin's head and put it upon a pole and stuck it up just at the angle of the road in the own pasture. In 1771, another slave, Fraser's Beck, was tried for hosting a large number of slaves at a supper and punished by having her ears slit, 39 lashes under the gallows and 39 again against the long stores. Several other slaves received similar punishment as a result of the trial. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to get to the part that sickens my stomach, that makes me want to do this series, to let Jamaica know how wicked some of these slave masters were, how wicked some of these colonizers were. And this wickedness is transferred from the plantation owner to the slave. And that is why we're having the problem that we're having today in Jamaica. Now, the brutal punishment of slave and the derby dose, I want you to pay particular attention to this, because you've never heard anything like this before. Thistlewood routinely punishes slaves with fierce flogging and other cruel and gruesome punishment. In 1756, Azat was recaptured after running away, and Thistlewood put him in the bilboes, both feet gagged him, locked his hand together, rubbed him with molasses and exposed him naked to the flies all day and to the mosquitoes all night without fire. Thistlewood often had a slave beaten, after with salt, pickle, lime juice and burnt pepper were rubbed onto the open wounds. He wrote that when two slaves named Punch and Kwaku were caught for running away, they were well flogged and then washed and rubbed in salt, pickle, lime juice and burnt pepper. In 1756, Thistlewood added a gruesome element to this punishment on several occasions. On January 28, he wrote, "At Derby, well whipped and made Egypt shit in his mouth." Derby's crime was stealing and eating sugar cane. Thistlewood called this favorite form of punishment Derby's dose. On May 26, Derby was caught eating canes by Port Royal by another slave. Thistlewood records had him well flogged and pickled, then made extra shit in his mouth. On July 24th, Port Royal tried to run away, but was recaptured. Thistlewood wrote, "Gave him a moderate whipping, pickled him well, made extra shit in his mouth. Immediately put a gag while his nose was full and made him wear it 4 or 5 hours. The following day, a female slave named Phyllis was punished the same way, although apparently spared the gag and received the punishment again on the 31st. On July 30th, a slave named Hector was whipped for losing his toe, and Thistlewood made New Negro Joe piss in his eyes and mouth. On September 27th, Egypt was whipped and given Derby dose for eating cane. In October of that year, 3 more slaves, Hector, Joe, and Mr. Watt Pomonia, were equally punished for the same crime. Whilst there are no recording of Derby dose after 1756, Thistlewood's other cruel and vicious punishment continued. In 1770, Cuba exacted some revenge for punishment received for attempting to run away by excreting in a punch strainer in the cookroom. Thistlewood had the last word by having the offended items rubbed all over his face and mouth. His systematic rape of enslaved girls and women was another aspect of his brutality. Enslaved women who ran away were whipped and put in collars, yokes, or placed in field gangs and raped by Thistlewood, who documented his activities in his journal. Some of the whippings were extremely severe and the most minor of infractions. Thistlewood had Dick flogged for planting a potato slip at the wrong end of the ground. Cuba ran away 14 times between 1770 and 1774, but was recaptured each time. In 1771, when she was recaptured after running away, Thistlewood had her flogged and put a chain about her neck. On another occasion, he flogged her well and branded mark her on the forehead. In 1774, Thistlewood sailed out to a ship bound for Georgia after another runaway attempt. In 1772, he had 3 slaves whipped for damage caused by walking through his corn piece. In 1774, he ordered the flogging of a party of slaves for not working hard enough. Between 1774 and 1775, Solon failed to catch enough fish on several occasions, and Thistlewood had him flogged for his failure. After one beating, Solon ran away, but eventually returned, whereupon Thistlewood had him flogged and a collar and chain put about his neck, after which he was immediately sent out to fish again. This was a punishment meted out to Solon on several occasions, often after he was recaptured following an attempt to run away. In 1776, when Lincoln failed to catch enough fish, Thistlewood ordered the unfortunate slave fisherman to be flogged and put him in the bilboes. In 1778, when the slave driver, Dick, failed in his duty to force the slave to work hard enough, Thistlewood ordered another slave, Jimmy, to have Dick flogged. But Thistlewood expressed dissatisfaction with Jimmy's effort in flogging Dick and ordered that Jimmy be flogged. Thistlewood demoted Dick to the field and made Strap the new slave driver. But Strap was overfond of the whip and flogged Peggy so hard that she nearly lost her use of her right eye. Thistlewood had Strap flogged for his carelessness and reinstated Dick as a slave driver. The Derby dose. Can you imagine, ladies and gentlemen, the nastiness of some of these white slave owners? Just the way they live, nasty. Because when we came from Africa, we came as royalty. We know about taking a shower or bathing in the river to clean ourselves. They didn't know anything about that, so they accommodate all these filth and these nastiness. And that is why I'm appealing to Jamaican mothers and fathers to teach your children history. Teach your children the truth so they will know where the nastiness of some of their action that they have adopted came from. Thomas Thistlewood. What a wicked fuck up. Which I had an opportunity to meet him, because I can tell you this, I personally could never ever be a slave for Thomas Thistlewood. Thomas Thistlewood's head would be hanging on a piece of wood done by me. I guarantee you that. I'd rather die than to live a life of slave. And that is why I respect only 4 of our national heroes. I respect Nanny of the Maroons. I respect Paul Bogle. I respect Sam Shaw. And I have much respect for the Honorable Marcus Garvey. I don't give a damn about the other 3. Jamaica, it is up to you to teach your children the history, the truth of what happened to them. Let them know it's not their fault. It is just like a woman who was raped. It's not your fault. You can't blame it on yourself. You have to blame it on the person who did that evil, cruel wickedness to you. The habits that some of you women have in terms of having 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 men came from the Thomas Thistlewood series, where we would just rape any slave that you wanted and do whatever you wanted to do with them. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't even want to go further with this nasty man, Thomas